The termination letter slid across the polished mahogany desk, stopping inches from Clara's sensible scuffed loafers. Randall leaned back in his genuine Eames chair, steepling his fingers with a predatory smirk that didn't quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Clean out your desk by 3, Clara. In this industry, nosy analysts who don't know their place end up blacklisted. You're done in New York." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't beg. Instead, a strange, almost pitying smile touched the corners of her mouth as she picked up the paper. He thought he was swatting a fly. He had no idea he had just detonated a bomb. The Manhattan skyline was a jagged graph of glass and steel against the November morning, a fitting backdrop for the Stone Kensington Group. Occupying the top 5 floors of a premium skyscraper in the financial district, the firm was a titan in commercial real estate and venture capital. At the helm of its flagship New York office was Randall Stone, a man whose tailored Brioni suits and aggressively charismatic demeanor masked a profound, gnawing mediocrity. Sitting 30 feet outside Randall's sprawling corner office, amidst the hum of Bloomberg terminals and the frantic energy of junior brokers, was Clara Hayes, or at least that was the name on her laminated security badge. To the rest of the floor, Clara was a level 2 financial analyst. She was the woman who wore unassuming beige cardigans, tied her hair in a loose, forgettable bun, and drank drip coffee from the corner bodega rather than frequenting the artisanal Blue Bottle downstairs. She was punctual, relentlessly thorough, and utterly invisible. And that was exactly the point. For the past 8 months, Clara had embedded herself in the trenches of the firm. Her grandfather, the fiercely private billionaire Arthur Kensington, the silent majority shareholder who had built the empire from a single Boston storefront in the 1970s, was dying. Before he passed the mantle to his sole heir, he needed to know the true health of his legacy. See the rot for yourself. And rot there was. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Clara first found the discrepancy. She was assigned to do a routine reconciliation of the Q3 expenditures for a newly acquired commercial property in Chelsea, a massive undertaking involving structural renovations handled by a third-party contractor. Clara's eyes, trained by a dual degree in finance and forensic accounting from Wharton, a credential entirely omitted from her fabricated Clara Hayes, scanned the digitized invoices on her dual monitors. The numbers were technically balanced, neatly signed off by KPMG during the preliminary external audit. But Clara didn't just look at the numbers, she looked at the narrative they formed. There was a recurring vendor. They were billing exorbitant fees for logistical consultancy on the Chelsea project. Over $4 million had been wired to their accounts at a private branch of JP Morgan over the last 3 quarters. Clara pulled up the public records on her secondary screen. Apex Architectural Solutions had no website, no portfolio of past projects, and a registered agent that traced back to a P.O. box in Wilmington. Digging deeper through a paid database, she found the LLC's incorporation documents. The managing director was listed as an offshore trust, but the authorized signatory for domestic tax purposes was a man named Gregory Stone, Randall's younger brother. Clara leaned back in her ergonomic mesh chair, her pulse quickening with the thrill of the hunt. Randall Stone, the golden boy of the firm, the man who constantly berated junior staff for expensing dollars lunches, was siphoning millions in corporate funds through a phantom vendor to line his family's pockets. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara meticulously built an encrypted file. She cross-referenced emails, bypassing the internal servers by legally requesting legacy deed and escrow documents directly from CBRE brokers under the guise of archival compliance. She documented how Randall had intentionally over-leveraged the firm's assets to push through the Chelsea acquisition, creating a smokescreen of frantic capital movement that allowed the Apex invoices to slip through unnoticed. The sheer arrogance of it was staggering. Randall wasn't a mastermind, he was merely insulated by a culture of fear he had cultivated. The HR director, Sarah Jenkins, was his personal bulldog, ensuring any whistleblowers were quietly managed out with ironclad NDAs and generous severance packages. The CFO, David Ross, was an aging, overworked man who blindly trusted Randall's aggressive growth projections. But Clara made a calculated error. In her pursuit of the final puzzle piece, a physical signature from Randall authorizing the immediate release of funds from a restricted escrow account, she requested a hard copy of a wire transfer manifest from the accounting department. The junior accountant, eager to curry favor with the corner office, mentioned the unusual request to Sarah Jenkins. Sarah. On Thursday morning, Clara's desk phone rang. It was Randall's executive assistant. Clara, Mr. Stone wants to see you in his office. Immediately. Clara looked at her screen. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping, dizzying view of the East River. A massive abstract painting, aggressively colorful and undoubtedly expensive, dominated the back wall. On a sleek credenza sat a collection of lucite deal toys, monuments to transactions he had taken the lion's share of credit for. When Clara stepped inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Randall was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, projecting an aura of absolute authority. Sitting at the small circular conference table was Sarah Jenkins, her face set in a mask of rigid corporate sympathy. A manila folder sat ominously on the table in front of her. "Close the door, Clara," Randall commanded without turning around. Clara complied, the heavy glass door sealing with a soft click, plunging the room into a heavy silence, completely isolated from the trading floor's hum. Randall finally turned. His smile was predatory, his eyes cold and dark. He walked slowly to his desk and leaned against the edge, crossing his arms. Clara, you've been a busy bee, haven't you? I've been completing the Q3 reconciliation audits, Mr. Stone, exactly as assigned," Clara said, her voice perfectly level. She kept her posture neutral, playing the part of the intimidated subordinate, even as her mind raced ahead to the endgame. Randall scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. He picked up a piece of paper from his desk. It was the requisition form for the wire transfer manifest she had submitted. He crumpled it slowly in his fist. "You requested restricted escrow data on the Chelsea project. Data that falls severely outside the purview of a level 2 analyst." He tossed the crumpled paper onto the floor. "Do you think I'm stupid, Clara?" There were irregularities with Apex Architectural Solutions. They lacked standard compliance documentation. Sarah Jenkins leaned forward, adjusting her thick-rimmed glasses. Clara, that is not your concern. Apex is a preferred vetted vendor. Your job is data entry and preliminary analysis, not acting as an unappointed auditor. You've breached protocol and frankly, you've overstepped in a way that makes the executive team incredibly uncomfortable. Randall pushed off the desk, taking 2 steps toward Clara. He loomed over her, trying to use his height to intimidate. You're a nobody, Clara. You come in here with your state school degree and your cheap shoes, thinking you're going to uncover some grand conspiracy and be the hero. You're playing out of your league. This is the big leagues. We move billions of dollars, and we don't have time for a rogue clerk playing detective. She didn't back down. The funds routed to Apex are highly irregular, Randall. The SEC would likely agree. The use of his first name made a muscle feather in his jaw. The mask of calm corporate discipline slipped, revealing the raging, panicked narcissist beneath. How dare you, Randall hissed, his face flushing dark red. You little pest. I built this branch. I am the king of this castle, and you are a cockroach I am about to step on. He gestured violently toward Sarah. Give her the papers. Sarah slid the manila folder across the table. Clara, effectively immediately, your employment at Stone Kensington is terminated for gross insubordination and breach of internal security protocols. Inside this folder is your severance agreement. If you sign the NDA, you will receive 3 months' pay. If you do not, we will terminate you with cause. You will receive nothing, and Mr. Stone will personally ensure that every major financial institution in Manhattan knows you are a security risk. Clara looked at the folder, then back up at Randall. His chest was heaving slightly. He was terrified, she realized. He was terrified that she actually had the proof. I won't be signing an NDA, Clara said softly. Randall laughed, a harsh, booming sound echoing off the glass. Suit yourself. Have fun working the cash register at the grocery store, because you are dead in this industry. Dead. Sarah, escort her to her desk. I want her boxed up and escorted out of the lobby by security in 15 minutes. Revoke all her server access now. Already done, Randall, Sarah said, standing up. Clara turned on her heel and walked to the door. As she reached for the handle, Randall called out, You thought you were so smart, Clara, but you're just a disposable number on a spreadsheet. Don't forget that on your way down. Clara paused, her hand on the cold steel of the handle. She didn't look back. I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Stone. Enjoy your afternoon. Shahanda here. Dozens of eyes watched from over computer monitors as Clara, flanked by Sarah and a burly security guard, approached her cubicle. Clara methodically packed her few personal belongings, a cheap mug, a framed, and fake, stock photo of a golden retriever, and her reading glasses. She picked up her cardboard box. As she stepped into the elevator and turned around, she saw Randall standing at the edge of the bullpen, a triumphant, gloating smirk on his face. He mouthed the word goodbye. The slouch she had maintained for 8 months vanished entirely, replaced by the steel-spined grace of her lineage. She dialed a number. Da. And the agenda, ma'am. Clara smiled, a real smile this time, sharp as a diamond. A change in ownership. That evening, Manhattan was caught in a torrential downpour, the streets slick and reflecting the neon blur of the city. Inside the Polo Bar, however, the atmosphere was warm, exclusive, and aggressively celebratory. Randall Stone sat in a plush leather booth, a glass of Macallan 20 sign resting in his hand. He was surrounded by a few of his closest sycophants, a pair of senior VPs and Sarah Jenkins. The table was littered with empty oyster shells and the remnants of a dry-aged tomahawk steak. "I'm telling you, it's about decisive action," Randall said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He was slightly flushed from the alcohol and the adrenaline of the day. "You can't let a cancer grow in your organization." That girl, Hayes, she was a liability. Snooping around, asking questions above her pay grade. You cut it out cleanly, ruthlessly. "Absolutely, Randall," Sarah chimed in, eager to validate him. She was completely unhinged. Refused the severance, too. She's got nothing. "She's got a hard lesson in how the real world works," Randall laughed, tossing back his scotch. He felt invincible. With the nosy analyst gone, his brother could expedite the final invoicing for Apex by Friday. Once those funds cleared the Cayman accounts, he would be untouchable. He could finally afford to buy out his ex-wife's alimony demands and secure the Hamptons property he'd been eyeing. The old man, Arthur Kensington, was practically a ghost anyway. Rumor had it the old billionaire was on life support. The parent company was rudderless, leaving branch directors like Randall to run their fiefdoms exactly as they pleased. "To Stone Kensington," Randall toasted, raising a fresh glass the waiter had just materialized. "And to those who actually know how to run it." 3 miles away, 50 stories above the rain-slicked pavement of Park Avenue, the mood was vastly different. The penthouse apartment was a masterclass in understated billionaire wealth muted tones, original Rothkos, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked down upon the city like a chessboard. Clara stood by the glass, holding a simple mug of black tea. She had washed off the dull, neutral makeup she wore as Clara Hayes. Her hair fell in rich, dark waves over the shoulders of a pristine, tailored white silk blouse and wide-legged trousers. She looked every inch the heir to a $10 billion empire. Behind her, the massive oak dining table had been converted into a war room. 5 high-powered attorneys from Cravath, Swain and Moore, dressed in impeccable evening suits, were sorting through stacks of legal documents. Beside them sat David Ross, the CFO of the New York branch. He looked pale, terrified, and deeply conflicted. "I swear to you, Miss Kensington," David said, his voice trembling slightly as he wiped sweat from his balding forehead. "I had no idea the extent of it. Randall bypassed my authorization for the Apex powers. He claimed it was a board-mandated initiative for the Chelsea acquisition." Clara turned away from the window, her gaze settling on the frightened CFO. "I know, David. I've seen the audit logs. I know you were negligent, not complicit. That is the only reason you are sitting in my penthouse tonight, instead of being interrogated by the FBI." David swallowed hard. "Thank you, Mum." She walked over to the table and took a seat at the head. "You are going to retain your position, David, but you are going to help me dismantle Randall Stone's entire infrastructure tomorrow morning. Every shell company, every inflated invoice, every terrified junior employee he forced into silence. We are going to rip the floorboards up." The lead attorney, a silver-haired titan of corporate law named Harrison Vance Wade. She remembered her grandfather's old friend preferred his middle name. Harrison Cole slid a thick leather-bound folio across the table. As per his ironclad will, his 6% controlling interest in Kensington Holdings and all its subsidiaries, including the Stone Kensington Group, transfers immediately and irrevocably to you. Clara looked down at the documents. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, threatened to break through her iron composure. Arthur Kensington had died peacefully in his sleep at 2 a.m. the previous night. She had spent the morning mourning him in private, crying until her eyes were raw, before putting on her Clara Hayes, disguised one last time to walk into the office and spring the final trap on Randall. Her grandfather had asked for this. He wanted the house cleaned before he was even buried. She picked up the solid gold Mont Blanc pen, her grandfather's pen, and signed her name on the final line. "Have the board members confirmed their attendance for tomorrow?" Clara asked, closing the folio. "All of them," Harrison replied, "including Mr. Stone. He believes the emergency meeting has been called to discuss the succession protocols following Arthur's passing. He assumes the board will vote to decentralize the company, giving him total autonomy over the New York branch." Clara allowed a dark, chilling smile to ghost across her lips. "Let him believe that. I want him to walk into that boardroom feeling like a king." She stood up, walking back to the window to look out over the city. The rain was letting up, the storm passing, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity in the air. Randall Stone had fired her, humiliated her, and tried to destroy her career to protect his petty thefts. He thought she was a nobody. He thought he had won. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., we are going to burn his kingdom to the ground. The morning sun hit the glass facades of the financial district, casting sharp golden angles across the pavement. For Randall Stone, the light felt like a personal spotlight. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in his Tribeca penthouse, adjusting the Windsor knot of his crimson silk tie. He checked his reflection, admiring the sharp cut of his bespoke suit, the subtle gleam of his Patek Philippe watch, and the confident, almost predatory set of his jaw. Today was the day he would inherit the earth. His phone buzzed on the marble vanity. It was a text from his brother Gregory. Contract is in my briefcase. I'm grabbing coffee downstairs. See you at Team for the signature. Randall smiled, typing a quick reply. Make sure you use the private elevator to the 55th floor. The old man kicked it. Board is voting on decentralization this morning. By noon, we'll be printing our own money. Arthur Kensington was dead. The news had broken on Bloomberg at 6:02 a.m. A brief, respectful obituary for a titan of industry who had faded from the public eye over the last decade. For the global financial community, it was the end of an era. For Randall, it was the removal of the final, decaying obstacle in his path. The holding company was vast, but without Arthur's iron grip, the regional directors would inevitably demand autonomy. Randall had spent the last 2 years cultivating the New York board members, whining and dining them, whispering about the stagnant growth under the old regime, and positioning himself as the aggressive, modern visionary the firm needed. Stepping out of his chauffeured Maybach outside the Stone Kensington building, Randall put on a masterclass in corporate theater. He adopted a mask of somber, dignified grief. He nodded solemnly to the doorman, placed a comforting hand on the shoulder of a teary-eyed receptionist in the lobby, and rode the executive elevator in silence, surrounded by junior partners who dared not speak to the grieving king apparent. When the elevator doors parted on the 55th floor, Sarah Jenkins was waiting. She wore a severe black dress, clutching an iPad like a shield. The board is assembling in the Kensington suite. Winston Carmichael, Beatrice Harrington, and Philip Montgomery are already inside. The London and Tokyo representatives are on the secure video link. And David? Randall asked, referring to the CFO. He arrived early. He looks unwell. Pale. Probably just the shock of Arthur's passing, Sarah replied dismissively. Or the realization that he actually has to do his job now, Randall sneered softly. What about yesterday's trash? Clara Hayes? Sarah smiled thinly. Security confirmed her keycard was surrendered. She's locked out of the network, and the severance package was officially rescinded due to her refusal to sign the NDA. She's gone, Randall. Erased. Randall patted Sarah's arm. Excellent work, Sarah. There will be a significant restructuring after this meeting. Your loyalty will not go unrewarded. He left her standing by the reception desk and walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the Kensington suite. The double doors, made of solid, imported mahogany, stood slightly ajar, leaking the low murmur of powerful people discussing billions of dollars. Randall pushed the doors open. The room was breathtaking, a cathedral of corporate power. A massive oval table carved from a single slab of black walnut dominated the space, surrounded by 20 leather chairs. Oil portraits of the firm's founding partners lined the walls, with Arthur Kensington's stern visage looking down from the place of honor above the digital smartboard. Ah, Randall, said Winston Carmichael, the acting chairman of the board. Winston was a man of old New York money, possessing a voice like gravel and an aura of uncompromising tradition. A dark day for the firm. Your grandfather-in-law was a legend. Arthur was technically the grandfather of Randall's ex-wife, a tenuous connection Randall had milked for years to accelerate his rise before the bitter divorce. Thank you, Winston, Randall said, his voice thick with practiced emotion as he took a seat near the head of the table. Arthur was a mentor, a giant, but he built this firm to endure. and it is our duty to ensure his legacy not only survives but dominates in this new fiscal quarter. Beatrice Harrington, a razor-sharp venture capitalist who controlled a massive voting bloc, leaned forward, tapping her manicured fingernails against the polished wood. Randall maintained his calm exterior, though his heart hammered with anticipation. Arthur's estate is complex, Beatrice. However, regardless of where the shares parked temporarily during probate, the operational reality remains the same. New York is the crown jewel. I am formally proposing that the board vote to grant emergency discretionary control to the regional directors. I need the red tape cut. We have the Chelsea acquisition in its final, critical stages, and I cannot wait weeks for a probate court to authorize operational expenditures. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each member. He was winning them over. He could feel it. The fear of market instability was a powerful motivator. I have a vision for this branch, Randall continued, his voice rising, filling the room with his magnetic, arrogant energy. A vision unburdened by the outdated, conservative shackles of the past. We are going to... He was interrupted by the heavy, rhythmic sound of footsteps approaching down the marble hallway outside. Not the soft, hesitant steps of a secretary, but the hard, purposeful cadence of a marching column. Randall frowned, annoyed by the break in his momentum. He looked toward the mahogany doors. Sarah? Please close the doors. We are in a closed session. The doors did not close. Instead, they were pushed wide open, hitting the rubber stoppers on the wall with a resounding, echoing thud. The silence in the Kensington suite became absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Standing in the doorway, framed by two massive, expressionless men in dark suits who radiated the quiet menace of elite executive protection, was a woman. She wore a tailored, charcoal grey Tom Ford suit that cut a striking, authoritative silhouette. Her dark hair, usually hidden in a mousy bun, flowed in loose, immaculate waves. An intricate vintage Cartier panther brooch rested on her lapel piece of jewelry. Winston Carmichael instantly recognized as having belonged to Arthur Kensington's late wife. Randall stared, his brain struggling to process the visual information. The face was familiar. The bone structure, the eyes. But the posture, the aura, the undeniable, terrifying presence of the woman standing before him belonged to an entirely different species than the one he had humiliated yesterday. Clara, Randall whispered, the word slipping out before he could stop it. His face flushed a dark, angry crimson. She didn't even acknowledge his outburst. She stepped calmly into the room, her high heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood perimeter. Following closely behind her was Harrison Cole, the legendary silver-haired managing partner of Cravath, carrying a thick, leather-bound briefcase. Behind Harrison walked David Ross. "Philip," Clara said, her voice clear, commanding, and perfectly modulated. She offered a slight, respectful nod to the board members. "Thank you for convening on such short notice on a difficult day." Winston Carmichael stood up, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Harrison, what is the meaning of this interruption? And who is this young woman?" Harrison Cole stepped forward, placing his briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. He popped the brass locks. "Mr. Answorth." "Carmichael, members of the board, allow me to introduce my client. As you know, Arthur Kensington's will dictated that his controlling 16% interest in Kensington Holdings bypassed probate via a blind, living trust." Harrison extracted a stack of watermarked legal documents and slid them down the center of the table. "The assets have transferred automatically and irrevocably. I present to you the sole heir to the Kensington Empire, the new majority shareholder, and the acting CEO of the Stone Kensington Group, Miss Clara Elizabeth Kensington." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Beatrice Harrington dropped her gold pen. It clattered loudly against the wood. Philip Montgomery stared, his jaw literally slack. Randall felt the floor drop out from under him. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, too thin to breathe. He looked from the legal documents to Harrison, and finally to Clara. The mousy analyst. The girl he had berated, mocked, and fired just 18 hours ago. Clara finally turned her gaze to Randall. Her eyes, usually obscured by cheap, non-prescription reading glasses, were now piercing, cold, and entirely merciless. It was like looking into the eyes of Arthur Kensington himself. Garrett finally turned to Dara. He needed someone in the trenches, someone invisible. "So, I spent the last 8 months fetching your coffee, formatting your pivot tables, and watching you steal from my family." I have no idea what you're talking about," Randall stammered. Panic finally piercing his armor of arrogance, he looked frantically at the board members, seeking an ally. "Winston, this is insane." "She's a disgruntled ex-employee pulling a stunt." Clara walked slowly toward the head of the table. Randall instinctively took a step back. "David," Clara commanded softly, without looking away from Randall. The CFO stepped forward, his hands shaking as he placed a secondary thinner folder on the table. He opened it, revealing highlighted wire transfer logs and incorporation documents. "Last night," David began, his voice wavering before he forced it to steady. "Acting under the authority of the majority shareholder, I conducted a forensic sweep of the Chelsea acquisition accounts. Mr. Zenz." Stone has been authorizing massive, unvetted payouts to a third-party vendor named Apex Architectural Solutions. Apex is a shell corporation, Winston, Clara interjected, her tone clinical. Registered in Delaware, managed by an offshore trust. The authorized domestic signatory is Gregory Stone, Randall's brother. Over the last 3 quarters, Randall has embezzled $4.2 million of company capital directly into his own family's pockets. Winston Carmichael's face turned a mottled purple. Randall, is this true? It's a fabrication, Randall shouted, spit flying from his lips. He was cornered, a rat in a very expensive trap. David is lying, she threatened him. I built this branch. I brought in billions. You brought in leverage, Randall, Clara corrected coldly. You built a house of cards to mask your theft. Yesterday, I finally found the domestic routing numbers linking the Cayman accounts back to Gregory. When I requisitioned the escrow data to confirm it, you panicked. You thought you were firing a nobody who got too curious. You thought you were sweeping the dust under the rug. Clara reached the head of the table. She placed her hands flat on the polished wood and leaned forward, invading Randall's space, forcing him to look directly into her eyes. But you didn't fire a nobody, Randall. You fired the owner, and now I am firing you. Randall was shaking with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. You can't do this. I have a contract. I have equity. Your equity is voided under the morality and gross misconduct clauses of your employment agreement, Harrison Cole stated, adjusting his glasses. Furthermore, the authorities have already been notified. White-collar division of the FBI is currently waiting in the lobby. It was Sarah Jenkins, looking absolutely frantic. Randall. Gregory just arrived in the private elevator, but the lobby guards, there are federal agents downstairs, they're... Sarah stopped dead in her tracks, finally registering the scene in the boardroom. Sirs, gentlemen and sisters, Sarah, Clara said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. How wonderful of you to join us. Please, bring Gregory in. I believe he has a contract he wishes to sign for the Apex final payout. I'd love to see him put his signature on a federal confession. Randall let out a strangled, pathetic sound. His legs gave out, and he slumped heavily into one of the leather chairs, burying his face in his hands. The empire he had built on lies, intimidation, and fraud had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. Clara turned away from him, dismissing him entirely from her consciousness. She looked at the stunned faces of the board members. The woozy analyst was gone forever. The Queen had taken her throne. Gentlemen, Beatrice, Clara said, taking her seat at the head of the table. We have a great deal of work to do. Let's begin the restructuring. The mahogany doors of the Kensington suite swung open once more, and Gregory Stone strode in, completely oblivious to the radioactive tension in the room. He was a slightly softer, less polished version of his older brother, wearing a loud pinstripe suit and carrying a slim Italian leather briefcase. of a Kansas. Traffic on the FDR was a nightmare, but I brought the final invoices for Chelsea. Just need your signature and we can get this. Gregory stopped. His grin faltered as his eyes adjusted to the room. He saw the board members staring at him with undisguised contempt. He saw David Ross, the CFO, wiping sweat from his brow. He saw Sarah Jenkins backed against the far wall, looking as if she were about to be physically ill. And then he saw his brother, Randall, slumped in a leather chair, his face buried in his hands, looking entirely defeated. "Randall?" Gregory asked, his voice dropping an octave. "What's going on?" The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with a buzz cut, flashed a golden badge. "Randall Stone, Gregory Stone," the agent asked, his voice echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous suite. Randall slowly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his perfectly coiffed hair now disheveled. The illusion of the untouchable corporate titan had completely shattered. He looked frantically at Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah," Randall rasped. "Tell them I had no direct knowledge of the vendor specifics. Tell them it was David's department that authorized the Alpex accounts. Sarah Jenkins, the woman who had ruthlessly enforced Randall's will for 5 years, the woman who had personally escorted Clara out of the building just yesterday, didn't hesitate for a microsecond. Survival was the only instinct left in her. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Randall," Sarah said, her voice trembling but remarkably clear. She took a step away from him, physically distancing herself from the contagion. "You explicitly ordered me to bypass standard compliance for the Apex invoices. You threatened to fire me if I brought it to the board. I have the emails backed up on a secure server." Randall's jaw dropped. The betrayal was absolute, swift, and entirely of his own making. He had built a culture of cutthroat self-interest, and now those exact knives were plunging into his own back. "You treacherous," Randall started to lunge out of his chair towards Sarah, but the FBI agents were faster. 2 of them moved in, grabbing Randall by the arms and forcing him back down, while a third approached Gregory. "Gregory Stone, you are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering," the agent recited, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Gregory let out a high-pitched sound of pure panic as the cold metal snapped around his wrists. Clara watched the scene unfold with the detached, clinical observation of a scientist examining a specimen through a microscope. She felt no pity. Randall had not merely stolen money, he had terrorized his staff, ruined careers, and attempted to dismantle her grandfather's legacy for the sake of an overpriced Hamptons estate and his own bottomless ego. "Miss Kensington," Harrison Cole said softly, leaning over to Clara. "The board requires a formal vote to finalize the emergency transition of power, given the circumstances." Clara nodded. She stood up, smoothing the front of the Tom Ford jacket. The room instantly fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the Stone brothers. "Winston," Clara addressed the acting chairman, "I motion for the immediate termination with cause of Randall Stone, stripping him of all severance, equity, and corporate protections, pending the results of the federal investigation." "Seconded," Beatrice Harrington said immediately, her eyes flashing with vindication. "All in favor?" Winston asked, looking around the table. Every single hand went up. It was unanimous. "The motion carries," Winston declared, his voice ringing with finality. He looked at Randall, his expression one of profound disgust. "You are a disgrace to this firm, Randall. Get him out of my sight." The agents hauled Randall to his feet. He didn't fight them. He looked entirely broken, a hollow shell of the man who had ordered Clara to clean out her desk. But as they marched him toward the mahogany doors, he stopped and looked back at Clara. "You think you've won," Randall spat, a venomous, desperate sneer twisting his face. "You're just a kid playing dress-up in your grandfather's clothes. You don't know how to run a $10 billion fund. The market will eat you alive. You'll destroy everything he built." Clara didn't blink. She walked slowly toward him, stopping just out of arm's reach. "I spent 8 months on your floor, Randall," she said, her voice dropping to a low, shilling whisper. "I know exactly how this firm operates. I know its weaknesses, its strengths, and its parasites. I'm not playing dress-up. I'm taking out the trash. And as for the market," she offered him that same pitying smile she had given him when he handed her the termination letter. "Watch me." 6 months later, the blistering heat of a New York July radiated off the pavement in shimmering, distorted waves, baking the city in a suffocating gridlock. But 55 stories above the chaotic streets, inside the Kensington suite, the climate control kept the air crisp, cool, and perfectly still. The atmosphere within the sprawling headquarters of the Stone Kensington Group had undergone a seismic structural shift. The culture of fear, paranoia, and sycophancy that Randall Stone had meticulously cultivated over half a decade was entirely eradicated, scrubbed clean from the very foundations of the building. The frosted glass walls of the executive offices, once imposing symbols of unapproachable hierarchy and whispered secrets, were now simply glass. The blinds remained open. The doors remained unlatched. Clara Elizabeth Kensington sat comfortably at the head of the massive black walnut table. She wasn't wearing the severe armor-like Tom Ford suit of her takeover day, nor the drab, invisible cardigans of Clara Hayes. Today she wore a sleek, understated navy sheath dress, exuding a quiet, unshakable confidence that didn't require aggressive tailoring to be felt. She was reviewing the Q2 financial reports projected on the digital smartboard. The numbers were, frankly, staggering. Without the constant parasitic hemorrhage of capital being siphoned into offshore shell companies, and with a newly energized, merit-based staff no longer paralyzed by the threat of arbitrary termination, the New York branch had just posted its highest quarterly profits in 12 years. The patient hadn't just survived the surgery, it was thriving. David Ross stood near the head of the table, concluding his presentation. The transformation in the chief financial officer was perhaps the most remarkable of all. He looked 10 years younger. The perpetual sheen of nervous sweat and the stooped posture of a man waiting for a blow had vanished, replaced by the sharp, engaged demeanor of an executive who was finally allowed to do his job with integrity. "Furthermore, Clara," David said, using a laser pointer to highlight a specifically steep upward trend line on the graph, "the restructuring of the Chelsea acquisition has been a massive success. By cutting out the phantom vendors and bringing the logistical consultancy entirely in-house, we've saved over $6 million projected across the next 2 fiscal years alone. The site is ahead of schedule and the primary contractors are actually being paid on time." "Excellent work, David," Clara said, her eyes scanning the itemized budget on her tablet. She made a quick notation in the margins with her stylus. "I saw the memo regarding the zoning anomalies that were caught last week. Ensure the junior analysts who flagged those secondary zoning issues on the project receive their performance bonuses early. Cut the checks by Friday." David blinked, a pleasant surprise washing over his face. Under Randall, junior analysts were lucky to get a holiday card, let alone mid-year financial recognition. "Friday? That's highly irregular for the accounting cycle, Clara. Usually we wait until the Q4 wrap-up." Clara looked up, meeting David's gaze with a firm, encouraging expression. "I know how it used to be done, David. But merit needs to be rewarded instantaneously, not just at the end of the year when it gets buried in holiday overhead. Want every person on that trading floor to know that when they protect this firm's assets, the firm protects them. Make it happen." "Consider it done," David smiled warmly, packing up his notes with a renewed sense of purpose. As the presentation concluded, the various board members and senior partners filed out of the room. They treated Clara with profound, earned respect, not merely because she held the majority shares, but because she had proven her absolute competence over the last 6 grueling months of restructuring. Harrison Cole, the silver-haired titan of Cravath, lingered behind as the room emptied. The old lawyer approached Clara slowly, a soft, deeply paternal smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. He leaned heavily against the back of an empty leather chair, looking from Clara up to the imposing oil portrait of Arthur Kensington that hung above the smart board. "Arthur would be exceptionally proud of you, Clara," Harrison said, his voice thick with a genuine quiet emotion. He worried, you know. He worried that the wealth would insulate you, that you wouldn't understand the blood and sweat it takes to keep a machine like this running. But you didn't just save his firm from the brink. You cured it. Clara looked up at the portrait of her grandfather. The stern, unyielding eyes painted on the canvas seemed a little less harsh in the morning light. She missed him terribly, a dull ache that she usually compartmentalized beneath her daily responsibilities. "He gave me the tools, Harrison," Clara replied softly, setting her tablet face down on the polished wood. "He gave me the education, the access, and the name. Just had to have the stomach to use them when it mattered most." "Speaking of stomachs," Harrison said, his tone shifting back to professional sharpness as he pulled a thick, tri-folded legal document from the inside breast pocket of his suit. "The sentencing hearing for the Stone brothers concluded this morning at the federal courthouse downtown. I had a junior associate monitoring the proceedings." "Gregory took the plea deal early on, as we suspected," Harrison explained, adjusting his glasses as he skimmed the summary. "He cooperated fully with the SEC and the FBI. He's looking at 3 years in a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. A slap on the wrist comparatively, but he surrendered all the offshore accounts." Harrison paused, a hint of grim, undeniable satisfaction bleeding into his usually neutral voice. Randall, however, fought it to the bitter end. He burned through 3 different defense attorneys. He tried to claim temporary insanity, then attempted to pin the entire embezzlement scheme on David and Sarah. The judge was distinctly unamused by his total lack of remorse. They threw the book at him. Harrison looked up, meeting Clara's eyes. 8 years in federal prison, maximum security, no chance of early parole. Furthermore, he'd been ordered to pay full restitution to the firm, which means the absolute, forced liquidation of all his personal assets and holdings. Clara took a slow, deep breath, letting the information settle into her bones. It wasn't joy she felt. There was no triumphant cheering in her heart. It was simply a profound, settling closure. The infection that had threatened her family's legacy was completely, irreversibly eradicated. "What about his properties?" Clara asked, her mind already shifting to the logistics of asset recovery. Harrison chuckled, a dry, dusty sound that echoed in the quiet suite. "Funny you should ask. His Tribeca penthouse, the one he was so immensely proud of, went directly to his ex-wife to settle the mountain of outstanding alimony he'd been dodging. And that massive, sweeping, multi-million-dollar estate in the Hamptons. The one he was trying to buy with the stolen funds to cement his status as new money royalty? Harrison tapped the document. It went back on the market in a closed foreclosure auction yesterday afternoon. Clara stood up, smoothing the skirt of her dress, and walked slowly over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked out over the bustling, chaotic beauty of Manhattan. Millions of people moving, striving, building. She thought about the cold November day she was fired. She thought about the cheap, scuffed loafers she had worn, the fake reading glasses she had hidden behind, and the suffocating, blind arrogance of a man who thought she was a nobody. "Did we acquire it?" Clara asked, not turning around, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Through a secondary holding LLC, yes," Harrison confirmed, walking up to stand a few feet behind her. "What do you intend to do with it? A summer retreat for the executive board, an investment property?" Clara turned back to face the room. The skyline framed her silhouette perfectly, casting a soft glow around her. A genuine, bright, and slightly wicked smile broke across her face. "No, Harrison, I'm going to level it," she said, her tone light but absolutely serious. Harrison blinked, taken aback. "Level a pristine, $30 million estate. Tear the whole monstrosity down to the bedrock," Clara confirmed, her voice ringing with finality. "Pull up the marble, smash the infinity pools, and bulldoze the gates. I think I'll donate the empty land to the state to build a public park." "As you wish." Clara stood alone in the boardroom for a long time after Harrison took his leave. The silence of the suite was a comforting weight. She walked back to the table and traced the beveled edge of the black walnut with her fingertips. The wood was solid, enduring, just like the legacy she was sworn to protect. She had walked into this building 8 months ago as a ghost, a disposable, invisible number on a spreadsheet meant to be mocked, utilized, and discarded by lessermen. But she had walked out as a queen, holding the keys to the kingdom. She picked up her tablet, squared her shoulders, and walked out the heavy mahogany doors to run her empire. He fired her, thinking she was nobody. Childless of kicking, Randall Stone's downfall was not just a result of his financial crimes, but of his narcissistic inability to recognize that intelligence and power do not always wear bespoke suits or demand the loudest voice in the room. It is a deeply satisfying narrative that proves the most explosive power often lies in the hands of the very people the arrogant deem invisible.